What is this thing called government, and why do we have it? What is so important about government? Our national government is made up of institutions. So we have the legislative branch, made up, which is our National Congress. It's made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. We have federal courts. The function of Congress is to make the law. They write the law, basically. And then federal courts, which is made up primarily of the Supreme Court, and then all of the federal courts across the United States and U.S. territories who interpret the law or say what the law is. Then we have the president, who is the head of the executive branch, and he executes the law. Congress says what the law is, the president carries out the law, and the federal courts interpret the law. And then the bureaucracy, which is actually part of the executive branch, but has become so large that it's sometimes considered a fourth branch of government, the unofficial fourth branch of government. So there are 5 primary functions of government. The first is to maintain a national defense and order. So this includes the military, such as the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, police force, and the whole function is to prevent arson, looting, keep people protected, safe. Then the second function is to provide public goods, like the roads that we drive on or interstate highways, national parks, education, a lot of those bureaucratic agencies, Health and Human Services, Center for Disease Control. These are all considered part of the public goods the government provides. The government does this by collecting taxes because they have to fund all of these projects that they're going to provide. And even though taxes are not looked upon favorably necessarily by everyone that has to pay for them, the United States actually has one of the lower tax rates in the world for an industrialized nation. Only 1 of every 3 earned dollars goes to taxes, which may seem like a lot or a little to you, but it's a smaller taxation rate than other places in the world. The government also provides public services such as libraries and county hospitals. And then a final function of the government is to socialize the young. This is how young adults acquire their knowledge, or young children even acquire their knowledge about the government, about the functions of government. This is done through public education, like the government class that you are currently taking, saying the Pledge of Allegiance every day, but primarily socialization of the young about government and politics is done at home. And so what is politics? For our purposes, we're going to look at politics as it determines who we choose as leaders of our government, but politics and political power are the ability to get people to act in accordance with the politicians or a leader's intentions. We can also consider Laswell's definition, which is of politics, which is who gets what, when, and how. So which people get their way, what is it that they accomplish in getting from the government, when do they do this, and how do they do this. And we have a handout that we'll briefly consider in class as well. So there are several forms of government that exist and have existed in human society. The first is a monarchy, where you have a ruler that is chosen usually by birthright to exercise in the past absolute control, but there are governments such as the United Kingdom that have constitutional monarchies where the monarch has sort of become a figurehead. Then you have governments that are run by the aristocracy, so sort of the small few wealthy powerful landed class run the government. Then you have totalitarian regimes, which are usually run by one person, and that person exercises absolute control over the government. Totalitarian regime that exists right now in the world would be North Korea. And then you have an oligarchy, which is run by two or three, a very small group of people. And you have finally a democracy where the people elect their leaders. There are two different forms of democracy that we'll discuss. So democracy means rule by the people, and you have two different forms of democracies. You have a direct democracy, which is where all participants directly participate in holding office or making policy. So examples from history of a direct democracy include Greek city-states in the 4th century BC, New England town meetings, and in the United States, referendum issues, which are the will of the people essentially. And that is when voters actually choose to put something on the policy agenda, and they make the decision for political leaders via voting. And then you have representative democracy, which sort of functions as an institutional arrangement. It sets up representative democracy, sets up decision making by leaders. And the way these leaders acquire power is through being chosen to represent the people, usually through an election, but it's a competitive struggle. And the reason why we use representative democracy is because direct democracy is impractical, when you have a nation as geographically large as the United States, as well as being as populated as the United States does. It would be too expensive to try to hold elections or gather people to make every single policy decision at really a state or national level, but definitely at a national level. And a representative democracy requires real, genuine leadership with a lot of communication from the representative or elected official to his or her constituents or people that he or she serves in office. So the policy-making system is the process by which policy comes into being and evolves over time. And if you look at the visual, the policy-making agenda always starts with the people, because the people have interests, problems, and concerns they would like the government to address. The second stage includes linkage institutions, which can be political parties, elections, the media, or interest group. These are groups that represent the interest of the people. So if a person who identifies an issue, we'll talk about Midlothian, Texas, because they are in the news this week. There were people whose children attended 2 elementary schools in Midlothian, and there was a plaque that went with the dedication of those elementary school buildings that was covered up because it referenced the Christian church and God, and they were upset that that was covered, so they went to the media to link their problem, issue, and concern to get the attention of local policymakers, but it's sort of ended up on the national news. But that's a great example of a problem they didn't like, was that duct tape was covering up this plaque that talked about dedicating the school building to God. I don't know exactly what the plaque said, but they felt that it infringed on their freedom of exercising their religion. They went to the media. They are holding a protest today at the Midlothian school building. So this is a great example of a linkage institution. The policy agenda is when the linkage institutions garner enough attention, then this issue at a national level, so not necessarily the Midlothian example, but issues at a national level are put on the policy agenda for the policymaking institutions to study and then hopefully make some sort of action in regards to that particular issue. And that brings us to the fourth, which are policymaking institutions. And this is the legislature, the executive branch, the courts, and the bureaucracy. And even though the bureaucracy is officially part of the executive branch, it's sort of considered in its own way because the bureaucracy has a lot of authority to make policy. So Congress can pass a law, they can veto a law, those can both be policy-making decisions that they have. The president can execute or use his presidential authority to execute or carry out a law that Congress has made. The courts use judicial review to uphold or overturn previous policy decisions. The president can also issue executive orders, which carry the full force of law but do not require congressional approval. The courts have the ability to overturn as unconstitutional executive orders as well. And then the bureaucracy can simply implement the law because they are part of the executive branch and their job is to execute the law, but they basically get to write the rules about how the law is executed. I know, that's very confusing, but let's say Congress passes the Clean Air Act of 1990 and they give the implementation of the Clean Air Act of 1990 over to the Environmental Protection Agency, which is part of the bureaucracy. Excuse me. So the EPA gets to decide how they're going to enforce the Clean Air Act across the United States, and that actually gives them a significant amount of power, particularly in relation to you and I as we go to these bureaucratic agencies seeking help and assistance in carrying out the implementation of those laws. So the fifth stage in the policy-making process or the policy-making system is actually the policy. So once an item gets on the policy agenda, goes to the policy-making institutions, and then those institutions decide what action or what policy they are going to create. That could be spending money, they could be taxing, that could be making laws, it could be making regulations through the bureaucracy, it could be issuing executive orders, or, and this is sort of important, it could be non-decision. So even if there's a lot of media attention, this is a great local example. The Midlothian administration for that school district could do absolutely nothing, even though these people are having protests and they're talking to the news media and they're buying signs, yard signs and t-shirts, and they've got this whole thing going. And Midlothian ISD could do absolutely nothing, and that's still part of the policy-making system. And the final part of the policy-making system is the people evaluate the impacts of the policy. So if a non-decision is made, there are going to be a lot of people that are not happy. If the decision to leave the plaque is up, there will be probably a smaller amount of people that are not happy. But if the decision to take the plaques down, there will be a lot of people that aren't happy. But people evaluate the impacts of policies, and sometimes there are unintended consequences when policymakers pass a law trying to address one issue. Sometimes other issues that are related or sometimes didn't even seem to be related evolve outside of that. But then that's why the policy-making system is circular, because the people evaluate the impact of the policies and it goes back to the people.